Thank you for those kind words, Wendy. Yeah, my name's Ken Crosson. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the process of engaging an architect. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the themes that inform our work, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our projects as well. I ran through my slides today, and I have to apologise at the start because I'm a little over time, so I'll rush through them. A big thank you for a start to Milot, Brittany and the team at ArchiPro. It seems to me as though this idea is a new way of connecting the internet, and the website that they've set up is very professional, very sophisticated, and it's connecting people with projects, with products and the professionals. So thank you Milot and thank you Brittany.
Excuse me, Ken. We need a little bit more volume. We can't hear you.
Sorry, how's that? Is that better? Yeah. Okay, sorry team. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. We're really good at talking about ourselves. And as Wendy said, I grew up in Methven in mid-Canterbury, and I think that was very seminal in terms of my attitude to life and to architecture. I grew up on the foothills, and it was just in that fold between the very manipulated man-made landscape and the majesty of the hills. And I think my life and my architecture is kind of reflected in that. I have no problem manipulating things, but always deferring to Mother Nature. I mean, we've got a great job. What we do as architects is we take these raw materials, bricks and mortar and concrete and glass, and we turn them into something beautiful. Matter to architects is like sound to musicians and words to poetry. And I put this slide up because this building is very important to me. I was always going to be a farmer, but at age 16, I went to a careers course in Christchurch. We'd been lambing and calving, we'd had storm after storm, and I was kind of over the farming life. And Sir Miles Warren had just finished the Christchurch Town Hall, and I went into the auditorium, and I was absolutely blown away by the beauty of the space, the combination of materials and the feeling, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be an architect. I want to be able to change people's lives. My job here tonight is to talk a little bit about briefing. So this is going to fall on deaf ears for all you architects and designers, but this is basically the first step for you clients looking for an architect. The brief is the most important document that you'll have to start with, and we get a combination of briefs. The smallest one is a few lines, 3 bedrooms, and face it to the sun. And the biggest brief we've had was 14 A4 pages typed top to bottom, including 4 that talked about the use of a kitchen. And we get everything in between. And also what we tend to get these days is portfolios of photographs, images from magazines and that sort of thing. And that's all good too, because what we want to do is find out what makes you tick. What's really important to you. So the nuts and bolts, how big it is, how many bedrooms, how many garages, how many bathrooms, but also your aspirations. What it is that this represents for you. Because architects don't plan houses, they design spaces and wrap a skin around them that actually ennobles the spirit. What we do in our office is slightly different to probably many other offices. We have this questionnaire, and it might seem on the face of it a little bit obscure, but we ask things like, what sort of coffee do you drink? Who's your favourite musician? What's your favourite book? And it just gives us little cues as to what makes you tick as people. The other thing that's really vitally important to us when we're kind of putting the brief together is analysing the site. Growing up on a farm, my father was totally aware of the weather. The thing that he did every time he came into the house is put the weather forecast on. And obviously when you're designing a house, you need to know about the weather. You need to know where the sun comes in the summer and the winter. You need to know where the winds are, the predominant winds, those sneaky little cold winds, so that you can design a house and mitigate all the negatives of the site. You need a topographical plan. That's really, really important. This is the fundamental contours, and from that we can work out the rules that are required that the district plans overlay. And then we need some legal documents as well. We need the certificate of title, which will talk about ownership and easements and restrictions, and we need the deposited plan to defining the site. And of course, a critical thing is the budget. The budget is so important, whether it's a big house or a little house. And the cost of a build is basically based around three things: size, complexity, and specification. Size is self-evident. The bigger it is, the more it's going to cost. Complexity, if you have a small, simple form compared to really tricky detailing with cantilevers and tricky junctions, it's obviously going to be a lot cheaper. And obviously specification. A 20-year-old Corolla is much more cost-effective than a brand new Alfa Romeo because of the performance and the specification. And it's the same in housing. And what you also need to do with your cost plan is understand that this is only the first part of the cost. There's a whole lot of add-ons that you need to actually factor in, including GST. The whole building industry is based around excluding GST. There's landscaping, there's furnishings, soft furnishings, curtains, driveways, fencing, and all of those. So we've got this very rigorous cost plan so that you can come out of this process well-rounded. The process is really simple, and different architects and designers use it and call it different things. But the concept or the sketch design, we do all with free hands. We take the brief, we analyse it, we take the site, we analyse that, and we come up with some design ideas, and then we'll talk to clients with our freehand sketches. We often do little preliminary models, just little form models to give you a feel of the shape, but this is all freehand and all very, very loose. Once a design direction is established, then we start refining the design, developing up, talking more about structure and construction, and then zeroing into the interior spaces, the kitchens and bathrooms. And once it's completely sorted and frozen, we go into the stage called contract documentation, the working drawings. This is the nuts and bolts. This is the basis for the builders to be able to price it and build it. And every stick of timber should be noted, the purlins, the rafters, the bracing, the structure. And the next day, once the working drawings are complete, we have the ability to go and get it priced, to either tender, negotiate with a builder, or various other options, and then look after the project on site. Check the quality, check that it's built according to the contracts, check the costings, certification, etc. Our approach, and our approach to design is probably slightly different to other architects as well. There are a number of themes that we embody in our designs that try and give it a unique feeling, a unique flavour, because we think that every context is different, every site is different, every client is different. Archie, Paul, that's your round of drinks next. I put this slide up because I saw it the other day. Archilochus, the ancient Greek philosopher, described people into two types. The first type was the hedgehog, those people that saw the world through the lens of a single idea. And then there was the foxes, who were light on their feet. They were irreverent, they were sniffing around, they were kind of searching for something. And I have to say, that's what characterises us. That's our office. It's in our DNA to be able to look at something different every time we have a new design problem. Sense of place is really important for us. We think that all architecture should have an appropriateness, whether it's a townhouse that's fitting into an existing context, whether it's a suburban house, a country house, a batch, they all have different feelings that should be appropriate. This is a little project that we just finished down in Wanaka, and it was an existing old farm shed that they wanted to turn into the manager's accommodation. So we did the new building, which we think has an empathy with the old. It's fundamentally new, looks very contemporary, but has the threads of the old building tying it together. The big picture, we like to have a narrative in our work, so that there's another story. This is a project that we've just completed, and it's beside a cemetery. And it was for 2 ceramic artists. So we liked the idea of working with brick. That was a product that they were very familiar with. And so we came up with a building that perhaps made references to headstones, that actually gave a little connection to the cemetery that was next door. We also like this notion of spaces for occasions. We're not fans of horizontal planes. We like the idea that sometimes you want to retreat in around a fireplace and sort of feel a little bit snug. Other times you want to go to the front of the building and project yourself into the view. In this instance, big fireplace. In behind there's a little nook, there's sneaky little stairs up the side, loft, just to give this feeling of space. And we like to appeal to the children in you. We like towers and bridges and spaces that actually have a little bit of interest. Sustainability is obviously a fundamental. You know, it should be the basis of all designs. I know Dave's going to talk about this shortly, but you know, there shouldn't be anybody that's not trying to get their CO2 levels down in the building. You know, we should be looking after the planet, thinking about our children and our children's children. And all houses should be naturally lit, naturally vented, have high levels of insulation. The other thing that we like to do with clients is get them aligned to expecting the unexpected. This is a project that we did a few years ago down in Cook's Beach, where the client gave us a plan. It was for 2 families. They had a kitchen, dining, living area in the middle, and they had 2 bedrooms on the side. And this is like in a Roman villa, and we thought, well, has that really got an appropriateness to Cook's Beach? So we did a bit of research on the site, and we came up with a plan like that. We've got the kitchen, dining, living in the middle. The 2 families can be on either side, and we've got sheltered courtyards. But what we did in our research is we discovered that Captain Cook observed the transit of Mercury just below this site. So what we did is we got the night sky that Captain Cook saw, and we fashioned a plan that worked equally well around stars in the constellation. So it's just another way of looking at it. We've got a fascinating project that's just come into the office. A woman that I last saw 30 years ago has come in for a house design. I met her, and I met her only once, and that was on a tube in London. And she'd kept up with what we'd been doing, and so we're now thinking about how we could embody that notion in a plan. We're also doing another house at the moment where a husband and wife have got a child unexpectedly. There's a series of screens in it. So we're taking prints of their DNA and we're actually using that as a basis for the relief on these screens. So there's always an idea that we're trying to personalise houses, personalise spaces. We're also very experimental with materiality and construction. We like seeing how our buildings put together, and if it's appropriate, we will use all sorts of materials. And I'm just going to run through a few projects, some old, some new, that we've been working on in the office for the last few years. And I have to say that, you know, it's me standing up here, but there's 10 of us in the office. We've got fabulous rock stars in our office, and we all contribute to the projects. This is a project that is dear to my heart. This is my own house down in the Coromandel. And I was going to always build it out of timber. When I was working in London, we were working with lots of steel and concrete and hard materials, and the architects over there were always intrigued about the detail that we could get in timber, a very uniquely New Zealand building material. We didn't have a lot of good clays, so we never had a brick industry. We didn't have a lot of good stone, unless you're in Oamaru, so we didn't have a big stone industry, but we had an awful lot of timber. And down in the Coromandel where I've built is with the old trip dams. So the way they used to actually get the timber out of the tops of the valley was they used to build these dams, dam the rivers, fell the trees into them, and then wash them down to the sawmills at the bottom. So the house was a reflection of those trip dams, very strong verticals with horizontals, a log cabin in a sense. And we also wanted to experiment with that idea that it's a holiday house, so not used very much. So we wanted to close it up, much like living out of a suitcase. And we describe this as a little bit like a pineapple. So the inside is kind of rich and luscious, where the outside is kind of crusty and textured, and a reflection of the native bush around it. It has a texture and it blends in to the native bush. And we also wanted to experiment, which we like doing in holiday houses, with the social organisation. When you've got privacy, we can connect to the outside. Or you can roll the bath out and have a bath under the sky or under the stars. This is another little project, and this is for a couple that in their late 70s. They came to us, and he was the owner of a large construction company. He said, "I've built 20,000 homes, I know what I want. I want it to be conservative, I want a pitched roof, and a bit like a Lockwood." And we did some research on the site, and we felt, was that really appropriate? It was at South Head. There'd been a number of shipwrecks on the point there, and we said, "Have you notionally thought of your house as a little shipwreck?" And he said, "Well, that was a pretty silly idea." But a week later, he came back and he said, we're going to run with that idea. And so we did. We built it like a little shipwreck. And we quirked it, so there's not a right angle either vertically or horizontally in the whole place. And this is a house in Sandspit where the client came to us and said, "I really like French provincial," but it was right on the water's edge, and we said, well, a plaster house with a simple gable roof on fill is not really going to work. These monolithic claddings are likely to crack with creep. And so again, we did some research, and early Māori used to have their hinaki, their eel traps, set just below the house site. So we thought, well, that might be a nice idea to actually build into a house. She was a musician, and the most important room in her house was the music room, and we thought, well, perhaps that could be the basket, the trap at the end. And so we did a house with an exoskeleton, again, in timber so that it took up the differential movement with some settlement in the ground, with the hinaki basket at the end, which is her music room. Lush on the inside, lots of timber, with her grand piano tucked away. And, you know, a slight bit of irony, and we like to have a little bit of a joke from time to time. Looking down from the loft, the kitchen bench is actually the shape of a fish in the fish trap. Two more houses. This one was on the coastal erosion zone in a place in Whangapoa, called Whangapoa. And we wanted to do a building that actually sat with that beach environment that seemed appropriate there. So we blended in terms of colour, and we thought formally that it might relate a little bit to perhaps, a surf life-saving tower or something. And again, the clients were keen for it to close up because they only used it intermittently. It's only 40 square metres, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, dining, living and a bathroom. And so that was an issue, an exercise in how small could we make it to make it work. And in terms of the detail, we didn't want it to be the same as their urban house. So we gave it some texture and some industrial feel. This was an interesting little site, a very modest house. So essentially it's a square, so the floor to wall ratio is the most efficient you can do. A modest budget, so we used modest materials. The indoor-outdoor flow that we all talk about couldn't be achieved on a site like this because we're in the bush. So what we had to do is have the outside living on the rooftop. And that's where the kids set up their tents, that's where they have their barbecues. And he's a musician, and so we needed to actually have these little moments where he could practice his drums. Because it was such a cost-effective material, we just quirked it in an interesting way. So we just basically turned the sheets around to give it a pattern and a little bit of detail. She was an artist, and she was a maximalist. Unlike a lot of our clients these days, she was an absolute maximalist, so we had to fit in her furniture that she had taken with her for the last 20 or 30 years. Sorry, this is the last house. This is a little project that we've just completed at Taiharuru. This is for a couple that had been involved in the America's Cup for the last 30 years. And so notionally, this perhaps is like an upturned hull of a boat. They are both very keen table tennis players. So the dining table is a table tennis table, segmented to reflect a table tennis table. And again, high spaces and low spaces, spaces connected to the outside, the main bedroom looking into the living area. We also want our buildings to look good at night. You know, we actually drive up to them at night, so it's important that they look good at night as well. So lighting effects are really important to us. As Vitruvius, the Roman architect, said 2,000 years ago, the benchmark for good architecture, for good quality architecture, is that it achieves a firmness, a commodity, and delight. And what he meant by that was it needed to be structurally sound, keep out the weather. It needed to be efficient, and perhaps in today's parlance we could talk about an efficiency of means, of labour, of materials, and it needed to be a delight, it needed to be beautiful. And we work in spheres from social housing to incredibly large houses, and we think everybody deserves firmness, commodity and delight. Thank you.